So I'm here at the Hripsime Church in Etchmiadzin, about 25 minutes outside of Yerevan. The story of this church is really important as it's connected to the history of Christianity in this country. Back in the late 200s, at the end of the 3rd century, there was a group of 40 nuns that fled from Rome. The Roman Emperor Diocletian, he had fallen in love with one of the nuns, Hripsime, who this church is named after. But of course, she couldn't return his love, and so he had her martyred, first tortured and then martyred. And that happened right here where this church is located. Following that, the king also tried to seduce another nun named Gayane, and she too refused his invitations, and he tortured her and martyred her. And we're going to go to the church that's dedicated to her just after this. In fact, while Hripsime was being martyred, Gayane said to her, "Be of good cheer, stand firm in your faith." These were faithful women of God. After Hripsime and Gayane's martyrdom, King Tirdes also martyred the other 38 nuns, and there's another church dedicated to all of them as well. So this is an incredible part of our history, because this happened, these martyrs, in 301 AD, the very year that Armenia became a Christian nation. And the fact that the king had these nuns tortured like this is part of what drove him mad. For one, Diocletian was taking land away from Armenia, which was already under the control of the Persian Sassanid Empire. And so with that, and then what happened here, and because of a physical, like a leprous type of skin condition, the king was really losing his mind, and the people around him didn't know how to help him. And so they called on Gregory, who was now in a pit in Khorvorab for 13 years, to be taken from that pit and brought to the king, where Gregory prayed for him and he was healed. And that's a whole other story, which we'll get to another time. So let's go ahead and walk in to the Hripsime Church. As you can see, there's Mount Ararat in the background. The church was built in 618. Before the church was here, there was a pagan temple. And this cross stone here is called a Kachgad, which literally means cross stone. And Armenia and all of eastern Turkey are just covered with thousands and thousands of them. So I'm going to speak quietly because, as I've said, the ancient churches in Armenia are working churches. Now we're walking into the older part. This is the original chapel here that was built in 395, and this contains the body of Hripsime. In fact, you can see that these are said to be some of the stones that were used to stone her to death. And this is her tomb. Hi, so we're standing now in front of Shokagat Yegagatsi. And this church, as you see it, was built in 1694, but the original church that was here was built in the 7th century. And actually before that, from the 4th century, there was a mausoleum and a small chapel that was built here commemorating the 38 nuns that were killed besides Gayane and Hripsime. Actually, only one nun was martyred here, named Miriam. In fact, this church is called Shogakat, which has the meaning of a ray of light coming down over her as she was being martyred. But again, we're commemorating here the 38 nuns that were killed for their allegiance to God above and beyond their own lives. There's a lot of history of martyrdom in the Armenian church, and this church was birthed the very year by church I don't mean this church, I mean the church in Armenia was birthed in 301 AD, the same year that Mariam and Gayane and Hripsime and the other 37 nuns were martyred. It's a beautiful church, so let's just go on inside, and again, it's a working church, so you'll see people in it, and there are services there every Sunday. So we're gonna walk in, and past the altar, we're gonna walk to the area where Mariam, who was martyred, has her tomb. And that just says Mariame. So we're at the Church of Gayane, and she, as you've heard me say, is one of the martyrs in the 4th century that really laid a foundation for the birth of the Armenian Apostolic Church in 301 AD. Of course, the church was really birthed in the 1st century when two of Jesus' disciples, Thaddeus and Bartholomew, brought the gospel here for the first time. And the pagan king of that time, after the church was seen as growing and having so much life, set out to destroy it and killed even his own sister and daughter as well. But he never fully destroyed the church. But when Gregory Lusorovich came here in the late 280s to bring the gospel, and then in 301, after the king gave his life to Jesus, this country became the first nation in the world to become a Christian nation that embraced Christianity as its nation's faith. So this behind me now is the church that was built in 630. So let's go into the building. The church, as I said, was built in 630. That's when it was completed. because of many invasions. There had been destruction and some earthquakes as well. So the church was rebuilt in 1652. But what you're seeing is what the building looked like. And these would be the three nuns, Hripsime, Gayane, and Mariam. The other nuns, I don't believe anyone knows their names. So next to Gayane's tomb, you can see this painting, and as you can imagine, those on the bottom are all the unknown nuns that were killed, and each in their hands is an olive branch representing peace, and then the cross, and then at Jesus' left side is Gayane. And the angel's hands are both a crown and that olive branch representing peace. So it's kingship and peace. So now we're going into perhaps one of the most significant churches in Armenia and throughout the Armenian world, and it's the main cathedral of the Armenian Apostolic Church. And we call our church the Apostolic Church because it was founded by the two of the apostles, as I shared before, Thaddeus and Bartholomew. So you can see in the distance behind me that the church is being renovated, mostly the domes, but we're going to go on in. And this church is considered to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, working cathedrals in the world. It was built in 301 AD. So let's go on inside. So now we're very close to the church that we were just at, dedicated to Gayane. This is a seminary of the Armenian Church, and this is an outdoor area where there are services at times. Pope Francis led a service out here not very long ago during his visit. These are, as I shared earlier, kachkars, or stone crosses, and they've just been part of the Armenian landscape for centuries. This one here is from 1602. And you can see here the Armenian writing. The Armenian alphabet was created in 405 AD by Mesrop Mashtots, because from the time the Armenians still didn't have a Bible in their own language, or they're using their own alphabet, and so Mashtots sought to create this alphabet, and each letter represents a name of God, and it begins with Jesus and ends with God, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful alphabet. And in front is the cathedral. This Kachkar is from 1576. And on the other side of the cathedral, these are from 1603. On the other side of the cathedral is the residency of the Catholicos, who is the chief spiritual leader of Armenians around the world, essentially the Pope of the Armenian Church. So you can see the proximity that we have here to Mount Ararat. I wish that you could see the church without the scaffolding, because it's quite beautiful, especially being such an ancient church. I'm standing in this particular spot because in 1971 my grandparents came here, Osfanan, Hago, Baziri, and hopefully I'll be able to insert a picture of them standing in this spot. The spot's also very important because it was here that St. Gregory, after King Tyrdes became a Christian and Armenia became a Christian nation, he had a vision of Jesus descending from the heavens and striking the earth with a golden hammer to show where the church should be built. And so he immediately broke the ground for this church in 301 AD. I was going to take you to Svartnats Cathedral, which is there in front of me, but because it's in ruins and it's not a working church, it's closed because of COVID-19. But this cathedral, Svartnats, was built in 643. The name essentially means celestial angels, and it was built during the time of Muslim Arab invasions into Armenia. And during that time, Armenia was already occupied by the Sassanid Persian Empire. There's a long story regarding all the occupations and conquests. It's truly a miracle that Armenia is still on the map today, and it is because God has simply had his hand on it for all these years. This was actually built on the site where King Tyrdes and Gregory the Illuminator met to have that famous meeting where he was healed. This church here, it stood for 320 years. It was destroyed in the 10th century, either by Arab marauders or through an earthquake. Probably was a combination of both. They found a fire pit in the center that was built by the Persian occupiers who were Zoroastrian, and Armenians were Zoroastrian as well before Christianity.